Now, is it discriminatory, even racist, to organise congressional hearings into radical Islam? That's what a Republican Congressman, Peter King, is proposing to do. The hearings are scheduled to start tomorrow, and he's run into a storm of criticism. Some of the critics are comparing him to Senator Joe McCarthy, who led hearings into allegations of communist infiltration in the 1950s. Others are backing him on the grounds that it would be wrong to deny that some American Muslims do pose a threat. According to one recent study carried out by the University of North Carolina, a total of 161 Muslim Americans have been arrested as terrorism suspects since the attacks of September the 11th, 2001. There were 20 alleged terrorist plots last year alone linked to Muslim Americans, but there were another 20 alleged plots that had nothing to do with Muslims or Islam. Well, we're joined now from Washington by Lorenzo Vidino of the global policy think tank The Rand Corporation, and from New York by the journalist and commentator Mona Eltahawy. Lorenzo Vidino, do you think hearings of the kind that Peter King is planning can be of any use?
I think we're, to some degree, necessary. I think the problem is not a huge problem. We're not talking about an essential national security threat. But it's undeniable that given the numbers that you mentioned, there is a problem. What I think has been mishandled is how do we go about having these hearings? And I think, first of all, Congressman King is probably not the ideal person to run these hearings. And in general, the debate surrounding these hearings has really become very poisonous, and I'm not sure that this debate is going to be very constructive.
OK, well, leaving aside Peter King, leaving aside the poisonous nature of the debate outside, Mona Eltahawy, do you think that there is indeed a need at least to ventilate these issues?
I think had these hearings happened right after 9/11, when there was denial in the American Muslim community of violence in the name of Islam, it would have been much more useful. But over the past 9.5 years, many of us in the community have spoken out. The community has been self-policing, and the community has helped law enforcement prevent a lot of attacks in the name of Islam. So I think that they're many years too late. And considering what's happening in the Middle East and North Africa now with all these revolutions, non-violent, that are becoming role models for young Muslims and non-Muslims everywhere, I find the hearings very anachronistic.
Do you recognise, Lorenzo Vidino, the fears of those who say that by talking about radical Islam as if almost any form of Islam can be regarded as a potential security threat, there is a real risk of stigmatizing an entire community?
Absolutely, and that's why I say that the whole issue has been mishandled. But let me correct slightly what Mona said earlier. The spike in cases of American Muslims who have become radicals has happened over the last 24 months. So right after 9/11, this was not an American problem. It was something that was coming from the outside. Now we have American Muslims becoming radicals. So unfortunately, it is becoming now a problem. It could have been done in a better way, but didn't seem that it was targeting specifically one group. I think the whole narrative behind the hearings, partially because of Congressman King's fault, partially because of how the media and some Muslim organizations, the way they have spun these hearings, have been inappropriate, and it is leading probably nowhere. But the problem has been there for the last 24 months, so now it's the time.
OK, now, Mona Eltahawy, there's a phrase that here in Europe we've become quite accustomed to. The phrase is homegrown terrorism. Until relatively recently, most Americans, I think, thought that that was not something they had to deal with, wasn't it?
Yes, and Lorenzo makes a point about American Muslims who are turning to violence in the name of Islam. But at the same time, as I said, the community is self-policing. It is helping law enforcement. And just as importantly, I mean, this poisonous atmosphere is not irrelevant. These hearings are happening not in a vacuum, but to the backdrop of this tremendously hateful way of talking about Muslims and Islam in this country. I mean, just look at what happened with the community center that's been planned in Manhattan, that's close to ground zero. So again, this is not happening in a vacuum. We're talking about hate from the highest levels of politics in the United States. Sarah Palin, Newt Gingrich, a whole bunch of other elected officials and non-elected officials who think it's okay to be hateful towards Muslims in a country where only 38% of Americans say they know a Muslim. So in this vacuum, when you have a hearing on the radicalization of American Muslims, how is that going to help anyone? It creates defensiveness, and it does not create the kind of dialogue we need to continue continue the self-policing that American Muslims are doing.
Lorenzo Vidino, do you think that Americans could perhaps usefully look to Europe for some of the answers they're searching for, given that this is a debate that's been underway in Europe for some time now?
Well, actually, that was the idea that was behind the hearings originally. And the American government is looking at some of the counter-radicalization programs that the UK in particular has put in place over the last few years. The whole idea was creating something like Prevent, which of course has been very controversial in the UK. But
I was going to say it's a programme which is very much up in the air in the UK now.
But it would be, it's being reshaped and taking some of the lessons, because some of the things in Prevent are positive, and adapting them to the American reality. But Mona is perfectly right that the debate has gone out of control. There are voices that have used the problem to score cheap political points and have created an atmosphere that is poisonous and leading probably to some radicalization. No question about it.
We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Lorenzo Vidino and Mona Eltahawy, thank you both very much.